All right. I would like to call to order. I'm going to turn off my volume up here. Sorry, everyone. All right, I'd like to call to order the March 13th, 2023 Committee of the Whole and regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I would like to welcome everyone joining us in person this evening and those who are viewing remotely. The board held an executive session on February 20th regarding personnel, legal, and negotiations, and prior to this meeting regarding real estate and legal. Board members, with the agenda before you, are there any changes? All right. I would now like to call on the board secretary for a roll call.
Dr. Anderson.
Here.
Dr. Bader.
Here.
Ms. Brandt.
Here.
Dr. Buck.
Here.
Dr. Crevecore.
Here.
Dr. Duffy.
Here.
Ms. Huff.
Here.
Mr. Leos.
Here.
Ms. Sidney.
All right, Mr. Johnson will now provide us with his superintendent update.
Thank you, Jackie. Tonight, I'd like to provide the board and the community with an update about exploring making Delta program its own school. Earlier today, I sent this letter to the Delta community, and I would like to share it with all of you. Dear Delta program community, following up on March 1st meeting with the Delta program PTSO, where we met with parents, teachers, and students, as well as a February 21st staff meeting, I would like to share further information and give you some updates. First, I want to thank you all for being so invested in Delta. It is wonderful to see people being passionate about education. At our previous meetings and in many conversations since, there have been many questions surrounding the discussion of Delta becoming its own school. To be clear, and I and other district administrators want to emphasize that this proposal is in no way designed to diminish or change Delta. It's actually quite the contrary, as we believe this change could enhance the Delta experience. We recognize the value of Delta and its foundational principles. The fact that it is a democratic school and are fully committed to it remaining a permanent offering in our district, whether as a program or school. We believe that nothing about being a school would alter the close-knit community, culture of democracy, and independent spirit that make Delta special. Nor would it curtail Delta students' access to other schools' classes, resources, and athletic and extracurricular activities. We believe there could be benefits to making Delta a school. One reason has to do with our ability to assess data, such as from the school climate survey. Right now, because Delta is a program, Delta's student feedback and data are lumped into our middle schools and state high for state and district purposes, and there's no process to efficiently differentiate it. Making this change would help Delta and the district by allowing administrators to assess the areas where Delta State High and the middle school students are excelling, where students are excelling and where we might be able to improve. Moving forward, in response to your feedback, we will be creating a stakeholder committee, including Delta's parents, students, and staff, to explore the pros and the cons surrounding this possibility. We hope this will give us an opportunity to have more conversations, but we understand that we don't always share the same perspective. So we want to work together in a transparent way to take the right next step. Below are some topics that we would like the committee's input on, knowing that there may be additional questions. Can this change align with Delta's foundational principles, and how? Would Delta benefit from determining its own graduation requirements, given Delta flexibility rather than being tied to state high requirements? Should Delta be able to create their own diploma? Would Delta and other schools gain from being able to evaluate school data for their students specifically? What could be gained from gathering this information? What are the drawbacks, if any? Can academic data be segmented for Delta instead of being mixed in with other schools, bringing more clarity and validity for data-driven decision-making? Does Delta have a comprehensive profile on popular sites such as niche.com and greatschools.org and the Future Ready PA Index, which new families, especially those interested in small schools, explore for information? Are these benefits or drawbacks to being part of these profiles? Is it more sustainable in the long term for Delta to be a program or a school? What are potential drawbacks to making this change? We are a long way from making any decisions about Delta becoming its own school. So you know, any shift would not be implemented before the 2024-25 school year. And any change would have to be reviewed and approved by the board, who will be regularly updated about the process going forward. As always, we will keep you informed throughout the process, and if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to John or myself. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Thank you. Miriam Ruback will now provide an update on student initiatives.
Thank you. Congratulations to our 4 state placers at the PIAA Wrestling AAA Championship this past weekend. Pearson Manville was runner-up at 139 pounds, Nick Pavlechko was runner-up at 285 pounds, Asher Cunningham was 4th at 145 pounds, and Hayden Cunningham was 5th at 127 pounds. Great job, gentlemen. 3 teams recently placed at the DECA State Conference. These teams consisted of Abigail Sparrow, Abby Mazer, Sam and Abby Kilareski, and Miles McCormick. In total, 18 state high students qualified for nationals. We also had 22 students earn a medal for the top cluster exam score or top role play in their event, with Sam Eikenberry earning the highest exam score in the entire competition with 97%. Lastly, State High DECA was awarded the PA DECA Cup for most money raised for the Ronald McDonald House, raising $4,518. 7 State High students were recently chosen to compete in the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association All-State Choir in April. These students are Karen Yee, Janae Haas, Ireland McDyer, Genevieve Clayton, Al Ebern, Nat Hickner, and Owen Parkinson. Congratulations to these students and Director Eric Clayton.
Thanks so much, Miriam. I understand this is your last meeting with us. I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the board. We've really benefited from having you, and you've been such an excellent representative. Thank you so much for your service to the board. All right, on the legislative front, I have a few items, just a few, and I'll give you guys more next week when I bring my paper with me. But I did want to let you know that the Governor Josh Shapiro did announce his budget last week, and he did show support for education. If his proposed budget was adopted, our district would see about a $2 million increase in our BEF. Special ed funding would stay stagnant, pretty much the same. And I also wanted to note a few things. Specifically, I wanted to say he did include funding to continue breakfast for free for all students, as well as free lunch for those who qualify for both free as well as reduced lunch. So that's great that our governor is interested in continuing that program. I'll have more details on that for you at our next board meeting on Monday. Is there any other legislative updates? All right, Gretchen, do you have any updates from the COG?
I have a couple, and then Peter, do you have any? No. Okay, then it's just me. I have just a couple. I just wanted to communicate to the board and the SCASD community that the Center Region Parks and Recreation Department has begun their search for a new director. And so that's beginning, and we'll see where that takes us. And also there's a Parks Authority meeting on Thursday. And at that meeting, we will be voting on change orders for the Whitehall Regional Park, which is good because the project is continuing, and at some point here in the near future will come to completion, which is very exciting. And also change orders pertaining to the Millbrook Marsh Spring Creek Education Building and Diane Curley Welcome Pavilion. And so that will happen on Thursday.
All right, thanks so much. And Peter, do you have anything to add?
Jackie, I have communications.
Oh,
Do we
can you
have-
usually do that now?
I don't know, do we have communications to the community? I thought,
Sure, go ahead.
thank you. Well, basically, I just have two things that I want to share with the community. And the first is that the Asazi's Scholarship Committee wanted me to let the community know that the scholarship is available for graduating seniors for underrepresented group at State Area High School. That shows a demonstration commitment to serving their community and with plans for post-secondary education. And the selected recipient will receive a $5,000 award. And this application process for this year's scholarship opens today, March 13, and the application instruction on how to navigate the process will be published in the local scholarship listing available from March 13 until April 7 in the high school guidance office and on their website. And the second thing that I wanted to say is that the CTE program that we were approved on in November, that was on paper, but they had to do a site evaluation, which they recently did on March 2nd. And we received accommodation in almost every area. And and there were the people that came, the visitors, they were greatly impressed with our schools. And we did get some minor recommendations that we had to fix, and then we had 2 corrective actions. But we have like 30 days to respond to it, and we're not due until the following time that they come in 5 years. So as long as we respond to it, we should be fine. So overall, the CTE program did a wonderful job, and so we're very excited and we're very proud.
Awesome. Great, thank you so much for sharing that. All right, moving on to information reports. Next on the agenda, we have information discussion items. I would like to call on Ms. Tanya Black to provide an update on the district's equity initiatives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, board. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. It is my pleasure to present our updated working copy of our district equity plan this evening. Our district recognizes equity as the foundation that frames every aspect of our educational system. And this is grounded in our a desire to ensure that the practice of equity is shared across district stakeholders. The equity plan is rooted, of course, in our policy 100.1, inclusive excellence. And this policy aims to foster an environment district-wide that is equitable, inclusive, culturally responsive, and free of bias, as you know. So, the equity plan that was previously shared was updated in January, and actually we worked on it through the fall as well. Moving forward, it is no longer a draft, but our working document. And we are terming it a working document because we know that the work of equity is never done. We'll never get to the point where we just, it's not a check off. We're going to continue to revise and update and to implement policies and practices with you together and with our community that support our students. So with that in mind, the equity plan, as you know, has 3 main goals. I'll share those goals. And then what I wanted to do was to share just a couple of examples of things that we have in progress and have completed to work towards those goals. And Chris and I have my partners up here with me, Danielle, to add to the conversation and help me with anything that I need to mention. So, goal 1, establish a culture of belonging that is welcoming, inclusive, affirming, and free of bias. Goal 2, ensure students' identities will not predetermine their success in schools by embedding equity at the foundation of State College Area School District's practices, policies, and procedures. Goal 3, recruit, hire, and retain a faculty and staff who are culturally responsive and sustaining educators, while striving to ensure that the demographics of our faculty and staff match the demographics of our student and community populations. Examples of steps we've taken forward at this time in these areas, not limited to these examples, but for brevity, I just wanted to highlight a few. We've embedded restorative practices throughout our handbooks to assist as we guide students towards positive behavior and respond to errors that students make, believing that discipline, of course, is an opportunity to learn. We are implementing a culturally responsive lens to all positive behavior supports programs and teaming with our members of our IU locally, IU 10, to implement those practices across the district. We have engaged in professional development, such as our MLK in-service day in January, focusing on restorative practices training for new and any remaining faculty members who may have missed it because of the constraints of COVID, as well as teaching culturally responsive education and implementing that into our lessons and into our curriculum. And my office continues to liaise with our office of, I just lost my thought for a second, with Linda Pierce's office to work on recruitment and retention of diverse candidates so that we might work on Goal 3. This has meant liaising across the state to make sure that we are creating a network where we can hire and retain high quality candidates, knowing that the hiring of diverse candidates not only benefits students of color or students from diverse backgrounds, but also benefits our community as a whole. We continue to engage in family outreach efforts through communication, through creating programming, and through one-to-one interactions. And we have engaged in culturally responsive leadership training for our administrative staff, which will extend to our teaching and staff and faculty as well. Thank you. Anything to add?
No.
Okay.
Any questions or comments?
I thought Dan had a question for me there for a second.
Well, it was really, first, a thank you. And I do have a question, which is whether you know yet whether there will be some opportunity for some community, like we'd had some book groups and some different things like that coming still this year.
Yes.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward
Yes.
to hearing about it.
Great question. Yes, and I'm going to write it down again just to make sure, and we can follow up on that together, Laurel.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for the report.
Absolutely, and we're also doing book pieces for our faculty through the summer that Jackie and I are working on, Jackie Saylor as well, so as kind of an independent professional development opportunities as well. We were just working on that last week. Where's Jackie? Yeah, there she is. Any other questions?
I do. The data dashboard
Yes.
that we're anticipating.
Yes.
Do we know when?
The data dashboard is underway, and I'll keep you up to date. I couldn't give you it'll be done by this date, but that's something we're working on as well, knowing that that's important.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And for now, that information is in the Future Ready Index, but we're turning it into a dashboard through the equity site. Thank you for that question.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Great question.
I do have a quick question, and it's more a point of reflection than it is, like, I don't expect anything in the moment
Sure.
that will suddenly be revealed about this. But I'm curious, as I have come to understand what equity is and it's intended to be. And among the things I've thought about, it's come to realize, is that in our own way, we attempted equitable practices, but in really limited ways for as long as I worked in the school district.
Right.
We worked hard to do that, but we were, it was a narrow focus, and it was on a case-by-case basis. It wasn't as broad-based as this effort. It wasn't as systemic by far. So, I mean, that's an important insight that I've gathered as I've gotten familiar with this process. One of the questions that's occurred to me, and I'm not sure if this has if there's an opportunity to answer this question in the moment, but I'm thinking about the idea of culturally responsive instruction and culturally responsive instructional practices, and how that ties into the needs of the ways in which kids who are economically disadvantaged are impacted by their niche, if you will, by their experiences. Now, there are other areas of ways in which people can be marginalized, but certainly economic disadvantagement is certainly one of those areas. Are there any specific programming ways, examples of things that either can be done, could be done, or are happening that might represent a culturally responsive approach to the kids who are economically disadvantaged?
That's one of the things that I've been working on, actually, because I think there's a bit of a misconception that when we talk about equity, for some,
Yeah.
or not knowing yet, that when we talk about equity, we're talking, any area of need, anything such as SES or lower economic status. So what I'm doing is engaging in professional development with our staff so that they are aware of that, because it's a little bit of a shifting of our mindset in some ways, and liaising with access programming, such as if you would like to engage in an activity where there's a barrier. For example, if a student wants to participate in a sport, that's something that it's cost-free. But to really feel a sense of belonging, do you have what you need for that sport? So we've been doing things like physicals for students. Do you have even the ability to buy the T-shirt that's a part of the sale for the team? So going out individually through our different clubs and programs, in one way, extracurricularly, to make sure that there's a sense of belonging in those areas as well, and that people have what they need equitably, but also working with our teachers who do a fantastic job of being pro-student to make sure that there's an understanding that when we're doing a lesson or discussing a topic or whatever it might be, that we need to have that as a lens through which we navigate and we help students as well. So we have that very much in the forefront of our thinking, and I appreciate the question.
Okay.
It was a question, Dan.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. Did that answer your question?
It-
As a beginning?
I'm thinking of it in terms of instructional practices
Mm-hmm.
too. So I think that is certainly that even we as a board are aware of when we get requests, for example, for travel,
Mm-hmm.
the district travel, and thinking about kids who are disadvantaged. How do they begin to participate in that when
Mm-hmm.
they can't afford but other students are able to do. So there's that side of it. But there's also, I'm thinking of it in terms of historically, for kids who are disadvantaged, we had a category within federal funding, Title I, through which additional funds were provided to address the needs of those kids. But I was just wondering if there are other, and when we think about the data that was presented during the strategic planning practice activities, the economic disadvantagement was a real tell for
Yes.
kids who are underperforming academically.
Correct.
So I'm just wondering, even at the level of the individual student or in terms of grouping, what are the things that we could be doing that are in a sense culturally responsive to their academic needs, so that we can close this achievement gap that these kids have?
We continue to provide tutoring support, and we continue to provide our summer programming to kind of close those achievement gaps. And in addition to that, I hear what you're saying, and that's something for us to definitely continue to work on, because I'm thinking about how COVID has impacted us and students kind of going backwards, and so yes.
Yeah, and that is very near and dear to my heart. We're not there yet. Something that we are definitely focused on. Megan Shaper has been wonderful. One thing to try to help is to make sure that students have breakfast and lunch every day, even on delay days. I know that seems little, but different things like that. We are again talking about equity in some of our more marginalized schools in class sizes, and we'll be coming back to you when we consider that, knowing that the characteristics between school to school, even as you're seeing in your board walkthroughs, are quite different. But the other thing that we're talking about as principal groups, but I think as Tanya works and we can continue to get more on, is our work with those families. For many of those families, education hasn't been a wonderful thing. So how can we meet them where they are, help them feel supported too? So that's some of the work and conversations we've been having. Chris and I are part of that culturally responsive PD that we received as part of one of the grants, and really talking about how to have that lens throughout every day so that it's not singling out those kids, but so that they feel just as equal as every other child. So definitely something we want to continue to work on. Little things can go a long way, but really getting the understanding to support them.
And as you're saying, and just don't know what to spend any more time on this than this question has required, but just the opportunity to build bridges with families. When the family's experience might not have been very positive in their own lives, and to build trust, foster communication, foster mutual understanding, is for some of those families is really necessary, more necessary than for others. And this is the question of equity, equitably trying to provide for their needs based on their requirements compared to other families. That's it.
We continue to do individual planning through our SAPE meetings, where we meet with families who might be struggling with their attendance.
Yeah.
What are the barriers, and having those conversations to build connections, so it's not, a scolding because you're not with us, but how can we work with you and help you?
In a supportive way.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments?
Do you want to tell them who you're working with for the dashboard?
I'm working with Chris and Nabil, and we're also liaising with other school districts too, who've done dashboards as good examples. So, yeah. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Tanya. I'd now like to ask the curriculum team to join us for an update on the IB program. Hello.
Hi. Hi, thanks. And thanks to Jen Schreiber and Brett Wilson for joining us too, and Jackie Saylor. The IB program is in its 4th year, as you know from the memo, and there have been some really interesting growth areas that we've seen in the past year. So I'm going to turn it right over to Jen and Brett, and they can explain where those happened.
You want to start? Sure. So as you can see in the memo, we have shared with you an overview of the program to date, as well as the courses that are offered and some of the successes and recognitions. I definitely just want to mention that Veronica Ikabazo received recognition in December as a Faculty Excellence Award by the Mid-Atlantic Association and IB World Schools. So I wanted to make sure to mention her name this evening. As we are looking ahead, we are going to be part of this fall and into January of the coming year. We'll be looking at the reevaluation program, which happens every 5 years within IB. So I'm going to let you talk about some other successes.
Okay. Am I on? Okay. I'm really excited that we have been able to demonstrate some growth in, particularly in our course candidates, students taking IB courses a la carte. After the few years of COVID that were really challenging, it's great to see that our program is growing. We have students being accepted into awesome universities, and we have a lot of teachers who have been trained to be IB teachers, and that professional development is a really positively impactful training. So it's great that we've been able to train 43 administrators, faculty, and counselors through the IB.
I also want to say another area of growth is how we were able to create a scholarship fund for students, kind of tying off the previous group that was talking about equity. We're trying to make sure that funds are never a barrier for the IB program. It's one of the things that we really pushed about that program coming here, and getting the information out and making sure that every student would have access to that. So those funds this year were awarded to a number of students. Some were full diploma program, and others were, excuse me, students that were just taking classes a la carte. I also think that's another great growth area is the students that are just taking IB courses to try it out. It's a different type of learning. It reaches a different type of student. It's not always just the high flyer. It's the student that has a deep interest in a topic. So we really want to try and push that. And I think that's a growth area, a strength area, and also an area of need is trying to get more students in that a la carte area, more students taking those courses, and kind of more people being able to talk to it, and more teachers trained so that we have a good foundation here as an IB school and supporting all of those kids.
Excuse me? Gosh. How do you qualify for those scholarships? Like, how do you determine who gets it? What are the criteria?
So we have established the scholarship through the Skagit Education Foundation, and there's a particular process that we follow. Students submit an application, and then we have a committee of our administrator, a few teachers, an IB alum, and a counselor who help to determine the awards for those scholarships.
So I'm curious because I remember when we talked about the program that one of the issues was that you can take an AP class and choose not to take the test. But if you're in an IB class, you have to take the test. You don't?
You do not.
Okay.
So any student can take an IB class without taking the test.
Okay. I thought, okay, that's good to know then. Okay.
No, we've done as much as we can to remove any barriers in terms of prerequisites and required testing.
I know that we had committed to doing that, and they've dropped the fee that they used to have up front too, right?
IB dropped the registration fee before we implemented. Yes.
Can you talk a little about a little more on that language program that you mentioned and how that will work?
The initiative for IB language and literature?
The school-wide, yeah, what that is.
So we're exploring an initiative that IB is offering worldwide to adopt diploma courses school-wide, which we already offer. Any student in our school can take any IB course a la carte. But through this program, they are offering to pair us with other schools to help build our number of students registered, and also to help train our teachers, to build capacity among our teachers.
Okay. Yeah, so you answered, because I was surprised when I saw that, because I thought it was already school-wide, but I guess there are some places where they don't allow everyone to do that.
Correct.
So, okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
So so the scholarship is for taking the tests, or help with taking the tests?
That's the only fee that students are required to.
Okay, because you got rid of they got rid of the registration fee.
Correct.
Okay, and Ms. Zagabazo, she teaches the theory of knowledge class, is that what, yeah, okay. Good for her. That's a great accomplishment.
I have a question about how students register. Well, I guess, can you go from an a la carte student, maybe take an IB course as a sophomore, and then decide to do the IB program as a junior and senior? So, because if you just take it a la carte as a junior, you don't have time to finish the whole program in your senior year. So if you want to use the a la carte students to grow the program, we need to open up the IB courses to sophomores so that they could try one and see what they think. And then, I don't know if IB even allows this, and then if they could use that to satisfy the requirements for the IB program as a junior and a senior. We also have the problem that we have some students that are advanced in certain areas and they're beyond the IB course. So it would be a waste of their time to take the IB course. It would be going backwards in their course of study.
So IB doesn't allow us to offer a la carte courses
Okay.
to students in 9th and 10th grade.
So you literally have to be a junior or a senior
Yes.
to take it? Okay.
Yes.
I thought I had talked to someone else.
Them,
Yeah.
up front, so they do know that. But, yeah.
So
We
following.
have the opportunity to give feedback to the IB program, to just let them know that, I just think that that's I think it would be a way to get more kids interested in the program if they could try it out as a sophomore, and then they'd be more likely to consider it as part of their program, even if it was an extra course and it couldn't count until the junior and senior year. So just, if we can throw that out to the IB program, I just feel like that's important
Yeah,
feedback.
the kids who take the a la carte classes, the reason we're saying it opens up the program too is then more classes run, and then
Right.
more students see the options. So the more offerings we have within IB, the more attractive it looks, and that helps grow the program as well. So it's a chicken
Thanks.
and an egg.
Yep.
I was just going to say that I have heard that there are classes, advanced classes that are being eliminated, and so you can either take college prep or AP. And so if that is true, then I think it's great that IB is another alternative for the kids who don't want to be in college prep but don't want to do AP, especially since AP tends to be so taught to the AP test. And so IB, at least what I'm hearing from high school students, is that it's this really attractive opportunity to not end up either here or to the AP test, but really to dive deep, as you've all been saying, into topics that they're really interested in. And I think that's great because that can affect the trajectory of lives when you think about it. So anyway, that was a comment, not a question, but thank you for letting me say my comment.
Go ahead, Mary.
I guess just to add on to that a little bit, I mean, every IB class I've taken, I've really enjoyed, and it was really great. So I think if there's some way to kind of expose that, or at least start getting that level of, really delving into topics in 9th and 10th grade would be great. Just having exposed to like thinking about why you're thinking is just a great concept, and I definitely think that if there's a way to implement that in courses earlier, that would be great.
To Debbie's point, I know you guys are doing a great job of trying to expose students through the curriculum fair or curriculum night in terms of getting them, but have we structured anything proactively to potentially invite, like, say, all the 10th grade English students, like, to come to Theory of Knowledge one day, or like open up a time where they could kind of get a taste to go to a section? And that might be another way to kind of get that experience of at least having a sense of what the class is like, even though you can't take it ahead of time, to really just even, I mean, if Veronica is so, she's stellar and so great, I'm sure if some kids visited her class, they might get really jazzed up to then want to sign up to enroll in the program. So that would be another potential means to, or whether you ask in the LE program or where, there's a variety. We want to keep it open to everybody, but yeah, just a thought.
I do visit all 10th grade social studies classes and invite students to sit in on classes. And I do have students who take us up on that. So, yeah.
Cool.
So thank you very much. I'm wondering, for the course of study, professional development, looking at international education and, the sort of the challenges of the world, I spend probably too much time at work reading global risk reports. And the things that have been appearing on global risk reports as the most pressing issues for the world and global citizens include changes in artificial intelligence, social media, the erosion of democracies, the threat of climate change, and the deployment of weapons of mass destruction. None of these are fun, per se, but I'm just wondering how our program is teaching about these issues. I understand that's probably a really huge question and might need its own sort of whole follow-up. I do see that the IB program internationally does have some statements about some of these things, but I'm just wondering how it's happening in our own school. Is it?
That is a big question. And
I would say we have courses, IB and non-IB, that address some of the topics you're talking about. Are there specific courses on each topic? No.
Well, I mean, we're not a university.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's those topics are embedded within some of our other courses. Again, IB or non-IB.
and with regard to things in particular like AI, we've started having some conversations with teachers around AI and what does that look like, and with some of our tech coaches as well, in terms of planning forward for that. So those conversations are preliminary and they are happening, particularly in relationship to like ChatGPT and some other things where teachers are starting to look at how that might change some of the things that they do. And I think we have to talk to teachers first and empower them a little bit, and then perhaps think about how that has impacts for students. That looks like.
Okay.
Go ahead.
We had suspended, I thought we had ended the career program, but when I read through this, it talked about they have a particular definition in 3 things, which includes a 2-year. Can you just tell us what that means?
So we ask the board to vote on to keep or suspend, but we still have students in year 2. So we have to continue it, but we're suspending it for now. We're not accepting new students right now in the CP program.
But they said the thing said something about a 2-year period during which we develop a plan of action to reestablish it.
Right, if we're going to do that.
Okay, so it's not that we signed on forever.
No.
Okay, that's why I was confused by it.
Yeah, we're suspending it for now. We may be bringing back a recommendation to the board, one way or the other.
Yeah, I thought we had already done that, so thanks.
We suspended it.
That's why I was curious about it.
All right, any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Dr. Duffy.
Well, I really appreciate your summary and a re-review, if you will, of the nature of the program, how it's structured and organized. And it didn't hit home earlier about the relationship between the introduction of IB as a diploma program and the ages at which students can initiate it. And I'm wondering, just out loud, since this is truly international, there are international secondary programs that go up into ages 19 and 20. Now, typically, among our students, they're pretty much completers at the age of 18 and move on into higher ed. And so I'm wondering, just thinking about this in terms of the diploma process, for example, not many students choose that as a destination. In other words, they're not going to wait until their junior and senior year to get involved with IB to really work on the diploma option. They're doing this for enrichment. They're choosing in classes, for example, that expand or allow them to dig deeper, which is a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I'm just wondering that in terms of this as an opportunity for 10th graders, I can understand maturationally why they would be concerned about 9th graders not really being prepared to make such a serious decision in terms of entering into a IB diploma track, if you will. But it's unfortunate that to the extent that they have these rules that limit our capacity to invite 10th graders to begin to work in that area. Because when you think about even the way Delta is organized, they have 9th graders mixed in with 12th graders sometimes in the same classroom. My basic point is it's unfortunate that we are restricted in this way. We might have more completers if we could start it a year earlier.
We made the decision at the beginning of the IB program when we instituted it to not go with the middle years program. The middle years program really spans more than middle school.
Got it.
It's 6 to 10.
I
and
see.
So we don't have that
Got it.
feeder, if you want to call it a feeder program, into the diploma program. We just offered the diploma program and the career program.
Thank you. That explains it.
Is
Thank you
that-
very
okay.
much. I got it. Okay. Because clearly I wasn't getting it. Thanks a lot.
Yep.
But we're clearly seeing the opportunity.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I remember when it came to us, we talked about that this would only be those last 2 years of high school when we started it.
Yeah.
That was pretty straightforward.
And that this might happen.
Yeah.
All right, are there any other questions or comments? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Moving on to facilities and grounds. Next on the agenda is the solar power purchase agreement. Dr. Buck will provide an overview.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just say also, without Randy and Mike here, there probably isn't very much that we will review about the North Building. Oh, they are? Okay, I did not know that.
They are.
Oh, well, then that's even better. So then when we get to that, then we will have them. I had no idea because it's not open in front of me. Thank you. So the Solar Power Purchase Agreement Working Group, we have 2 of the entities of the original 15 have withdrawn. So those being Half Moon Township, which it was the smallest, and then CATA, the Center Area Transit Authority, withdrew. There are, of the remaining group, there are 3 that we still have to get commitment numbers from, and those are the Center County Housing Authority, the Center Hall Potter Sewer Authority, and the State College Borough, who I believe are voting tonight. I believe that's happening. It could be happening right now as we speak. So we do have an estimate for the committed volume that we anticipate between 26.5 and 27.75 megawatt hours to be contributed. And if Randy is on, if he wants to say anything about the process of the legal review, but we know that legal review is still going on. Randy, is there anything that you want to add?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to, I had an update just as recently as this afternoon, and we expect the legal review to take about another week to 10 days, as long as everything goes as according to plan.
Great.
All right, Carlene had a question.
Well, basically, I was just wondering, because I was reading that about the 2 that pulled out, and I didn't know which 2, and that we're still voting. So could you, not us, other groups are still voting. How does that change our volume? Like you said, we're still on track to still get the same, so it's not going to hurt us much?
No, I mean, the volume, the Half Moon Township's electricity demand is tiny. It's so small. CATA was the 4th largest of the group, but compared to the district, it's tiny. And their withdrawal is a few million kilowatt hours, and I would not think that it would do anything to the price at all, because with the county, the anticipated State College Borough contribution, whether it's 60, 80, or 100%, the county contribution, the State College Borough Water Authority, which was the 2nd biggest, and the school district at the volume that we've committed, CATA withdrawing for the purposes of price really does nothing.
Okay. My second question was that we don't know why they withdrew. Like, are they seeing something that we're not? Is there any reason that we would want to just look at that?
So based on the statements in that meeting, I might say something really unpopular right now. Okay, so this is my interpretation.
Well, you don't really have to answer it.
Well,
I'm just saying
no,
that I just want to make sure that we're looking at
happy
everything. So I'm not really asking for a question. I'm just saying that,
I would say absolutely not.
Okay.
No, I think that there was quite a bit of misunderstanding and a lack of attention, and that the newest member of that board, the Ferguson Township rep, had paid more attention to what was actually in the agreement than any other member of that board. And that was very clear in their voting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When the news of the Silicon Valley Bank bankruptcy came out,
Okay.
or whatever they call it. They said that they fund a huge percentage of local solar projects and governmental projects around the country. Do you know if there's any impact from that?
Oh, my God. No.
Okay, I'm just asking because it was, I mean, funding is one of the things we've talked about and the ability of the people we're working with to fund. So that's why I was curious. It was like 60% or so of the solar power stuff was funded through them. So it's a lot.
Okay.
Good.
Any other questions? Randy, is there anything else you wanted to add tonight?
No, not to that. Thank you.
All right. Okay, in that case, we will move on. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Randy. Mr. Fisher will now join us for an update on the North Building project. Hey, Mike.
Hi. So real quick, just put a quick memo together. We did our a good in-depth round of cost estimating here. It's kind of all laid out in the chart on page 2 of the memo. And really the only other thing I want to kind of note is that we plan on running these bids for the North Building, the former CTC, and the physical plan building simultaneously. We want to get the physical plan building out there a little bit sooner. It's a little bit more of a in-depth project, a little more complicated. So we want to give our vendors time to to accurately bid this and get all the information in. But as noted here, we're looking at next Monday for permission to bid, and then we've earmarked May 15th to accept, to bring to the board to accept the winning bid for actually both projects. So, any questions on any of this? I will say that the cost estimate is kind of in line with, our what we thought up front in our funding. So.
As always, thank you for the charts. Are there any comments for Mr. Fisher? Questions?
Dr. Hopp?
What's that?
I just wanted to point out that the reason that the pages 3 to the end are provided is to provide board members with our capital plan and to show where the funds will come for this project, as opposed to the physical plan building project, which will be coming from capital reserve. And that that Mr. Fisher and his team are doing a really good job of trying to forecast out our expenses for the capital plan. And obviously there will be differences, things that get added, things that get bumped along the way, things that we learn. And obviously there's a couple years when we could potentially have negatives. So if there's not additional funding from the general fund to cover them, then we will need to make some different decisions. But just wanted to point that out. I don't think this is a new schedule, but I wanted to explain the rationale for it being included here. And again, explain why, what the purpose of that schedule is for.
Thank you. Everyone good? All right. Moving on to finance and audits. Mr. Brown is with us to provide an overview of the 2023-24 budget process.
Thank you. And
And Donna's here as well.
Person?
Yeah, Donna's coming up.
Sure. So I'll give her a couple seconds to get connected so that she can bring up the presentation for you. Really appreciate all of the work that has gone into the budget process thus far. I'm working very closely with Mr. Johnson and the rest of our leadership team. Mrs. Watson and the finance staff have worked very closely with the various principals, administrators, our budget, what we call our budget heads thus far. And we still have some additional work to do, but we are moving along with the process. And, it may seem like some of the items come in sporadically and that we should be able to cover more categories to collectively. However, there's lots of information, especially on both our revenues and our expenses, that the further we go through the school year or the further we go through the fiscal year as time passes, we gain more information, and much of it is related to our analysis, but it's also in relationship to information that we gather from external sources. So if Mrs. Watson, if you want to go ahead and start the presentation, and I'll let Mrs. Watson take it from there on the first presentation on our budget development.
Okay, I was there. Okay. Sorry. And I was at the end, sorry. No wonder it wasn't working. All right, so the first part of the presentation is the portion that we didn't get to that was included in the agenda for the last meeting, so we'll go through that first. Related to revenues, we made some changes in the local revenues, and we're going to go through some slides and explain a little bit about that. First of all, assessed value growth. We've updated the 2022-23 projection to increase our projected assessed value growth. When we did the budget, we assumed 1.2%. We updated the projection to 1.4, and now we're assuming 1.64. That's based on the fact that, as you know, we have some outstanding appeals. We had projected that more of those would be settled in this current fiscal year. And we also have the results of our collections for the year. We had a little bit higher a little bit higher collection percentage as well. So in 2023-24, we've reduced our assumption from 1.2% to 0.75%. The reason for that is we contacted the assessment office. As of the middle of February, we had just 0.42% growth. So as we look at growth from now until about the beginning of June is when the file is final to send the real estate taxes. And we've spoken with some of the people in the community, with the real estate tax folks and the assessment office, and we feel that from the 0.42 to 0.75 is probably a reasonable number for that period during that growth, and we also are estimating some of those settlement appeals in that as well. So unfortunately assuming 7.75 at this point. And this is a chart showing our history of assessed value growth. So you can see that back in 2011-12, after we had some good years, we did see some drops there. And as we look out for the past couple of years, we've had some unexpected, actually higher than what we had originally estimated, assessed value growth in those 2 years. And this year then for the 2023-24, estimating lower. For more recent years, we've also included the actual versus budget for the assessed value growth for your reference as well. Interim real estate taxes. You may recall the interim real estate tax are those taxes for those properties that aren't on the tax rolls at the time when we issue the tax bills on July 1st. There's a separate billing. The majority of that billing hits on February 1st. So when we received that billing and we apply our collection percentages, where we budgeted $600,000, we're estimating $315,000. There just weren't that many properties on the bill, or not a lot of large properties. This is a difficult number to predict. It's just strictly based on the timing and when they're coming on, so we generally estimate $600,000. This is a chart of where it has been historically. The years where we're seeing large amounts, it is when you're seeing large properties added normally that come on in the interim period. So we generally, since we have no way of estimating that, we estimate around $600,000 each year. This is the account also that is the real estate supplemental tax rebates are netted against this account. And we've included in the budget an assumption of $100,000 as has been in the past. We will talk about that a little bit more in another meeting. The governor's address actually included some proposed changes in that at the state level that would impact this budget as well for the program. Delinquent taxes, these are taxes that when we finalize real estate tax collections in December, anything that's not collected gets turned over to the Center County Tax Office for collection. So this is impacted based on the amount of uncollected taxes then, and then collections as we go. So you can see the history there. In 2021, we believe that probably was higher because of properties turned over or sold during that period, because taxes have to be settled during that period. So not a lot of fluctuation there. Tuition, we have increased in the budget, assuming that SEAL tuition would increase from $270 per month to $295. So that's impacted our projections for that as well. And then this is the chart showing tuition as you would have expected. As the SEAL program was not operating during COVID, then we had reductions there. Miscellaneous local revenue, this is a large number of things that hit that line item. The only notable thing that we have here is related to athletic tickets. I'm not recommending an increase in athletic tickets. However, you may recall that their hometown tickets, there are some fees that are absorbed by the district. So in this budget, we are recommending that those be passed along to those purchasing the tickets. And this is a history. There's, this can be impacted by a lot of non-recurring items, especially that you'll see noted the Lamont building sale was in 2019-20. Any questions related to those revenue items? Okay, the next slides, and thank you, Deb, for pointing out that we had a bit of an issue on our column there. So these are, so first starting with the 2022-23 year, this is the revenue comparing to what we last presented to you in January to this projection and the changes. So you can see there that we're assuming fewer tax appeal settlements in this period, and the collection percentage, which is driving the largest revenue change, which is the real estate taxes. Interim, we've talked about. So really, we've talked about all of these items, except for when you look at the state revenue, we're estimating lower retirement and Social Security. It's related to the change in salaries that we'll talk about on the next slide. And then in federal, just a shift in when the ESSER funds are going to be utilized. In salaries, as we looked at the detail of the salaries so far this year, that decrease of 1.8 million is really being driven primarily by unfilled or vacant positions. And then there is some offset for substitutes and some sick vacation payouts. PSERS and other benefits is related to those salaries. Charter schools, our expense per student is actually lower. The denominator of average daily membership ended up being different enough to shift that. And then you'll see that we have fewer contracted buses than we had anticipated was the other purchase services. Those were the primary things on the expenses. When we get down, though, to fund balance, commitment, and use. So you'll see that the revenue there's a new line that we're proposing there, and that is called a revenue shortfall. Currently, well, you know what, maybe, Randy, if it's okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the charts and can show the dollar amounts. But we're proposing a shift from PSERS and revenue shortfall to a debt service commitment. The revenue shortfall, you may recall, was established in 2019, 2020, and 21 when we had some excess revenues and lower expenses. And we were anticipating that revenues going forward, especially in the areas of assessed value growth and earned income tax, were going to be lower. We thought that we were going to have shortfalls in our budget because of that. And that was the purpose of taking those excess funds and establishing that reserve. It turns out we actually had, as we saw in the assessed value slide, we actually had higher assessed values than we had anticipated, and earned income did not fall as we thought it would. So we're recommending that we reassign that fund balance and establish a reserve for debt service. There's a lot of information here, so stop me if it gets confusing. Sure. Earlier this year, you might recall that we recommended that we shift the payment of the debt service for the high school and elementary from the capital reserve fund over to the general fund. The reason for that is that PDE came out with a clarification stating that we couldn't transfer to the capital reserve fund if we had an unbalanced budget. What that meant is that we couldn't, those transfers that were being transferred to fund the payment of those debt service payments couldn't happen in those out years where we're showing that we're unbalanced. So it would deteriorate from that balance, and that fund is intended to help to pay for Park Forest Middle School, physical plant building, and some athletic fields. So given that, we moved the funds back to the general fund. So we felt it was logical that we move those, shift those reserves to the debt service fund until the point, so that as we're working on balancing the budget and working on establishing ways that we don't have the deterioration, that way we could pay for those debt service payments that were not in the general fund originally. So we added debt service payments to the general fund, took away that in capital reserve transfer that we knew we couldn't have because we couldn't have in there because we didn't have a balanced budget. Thus, our recommendation. Is that confusing?
Yes, but I think I got it.
I'm sorry. Randy, help me out here.
Yeah, if I could also add, there's another point there to make, and that is that the Auditor General also had some findings from some audits of several different school districts across the state, some of which are in our cohort that we compare ourselves to for different factors and categories. And one of the points that they questioned was the ability of a district to increase taxes when they have a certain amount of fund balance. And so having a fund balance for just revenue shortfall, as Donna mentioned, when we didn't have it, when we are no longer experiencing a revenue shortfall, we believe that it's in our best interest to have that not only for the Auditor General purposes, but also for communicating to our constituents, all of our constituents, that we have a purpose for that debt service, or for that capital fund balance, committed fund balance. And so I think that I know that I did it with Mrs. Watson. It's a lot of information. I hope that you understand that we have struggled with this ourselves to make sure that we weren't missing something, so that we make sure that we are representing the appropriate step forward to take. And we have, I can't tell you how many times we've contacted our local auditors also with different ideas, and most recently this presentation, to make sure that we are representing what their inference of PDE and the Auditor General about fund balance, about raising taxes, it is. And so collectively, I believe that this is we believe the best representation of using our fund balance, and allows us to use the fund balance for a specific purpose. But at converse to a capital reserve transfer, the committed fund balance can be modified by the board, as we are recommending that the PSERS and revenue shortfall fund balance would be modified, those commitments would be modified. And understand that we are reflecting this as a proposal in these statements, but understand the board will need to take action, and this is not something that the administration can or would even try to do without your approval. Does that help, Donna and board members?
Yes.
It's in passing. I follow the Philadelphia area media a little more. That's where I'm from. And as I recall, and this is in terms of one of our cohort districts, one of the questions that was raised related to the budget for Lower Merion, that they had a fund balance that was considered to be rather large. At the same time, they were increasing taxes. And so people were wondering, why are we asked to pay more when they clearly are in the black in terms of their funding? So I get the impression in all of this that we're trying to reconcile the need for a secure base in terms of having a fund balance, but not not carry it to an extreme that are just unsubstantial or unsubstantiated, I should say, to the community.
Correct. That's a very good description, Dr. Duffy, a characterization. I also would add that some of the districts, I'm not sure if Marion was one, but some of the districts also had been asking for tax increases in excess of the Act 1 index, so using exceptions. And the only times that we've done that is for PSERS years ago, obviously, and then most recently for the high school project. And recently, not even in the future, have we projected that we ask for a tax increase that would be in excess of Act 1.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Donna.
Okay, all right. So just moving forward, this is, again, the projection. This is the revenue over expense and showing that we would, with the changes that are in the projection right now, maintain that 8% maximum unassigned fund balance. Moving on to the 2023-24 year, again, we've talked about revenue already, so this is just represented here in the statement. When we look at salaries, we have adjusted the projection of salaries just in doing a more detailed projection, and that's up slightly along with PSERS and the related other expenses. So the FTEs that are included in this budget do include those positions that were funded from ESSER over the last couple of years. The mental health positions, and there are a couple other positions there too that were addressed in the memo. On professional services, there is a proposed electric study along with increased OT/PT expenses and some field trips and other notable ones there were that the assumed number of contracted buses are down, and then offsetting that, especially in supplies and equipment, we are incurring quite a bit of inflation. The cost of cybersecurity is up, and the HR system, as well as a couple of other things noted there. So basically, it's salary and benefits, and then the supplies and expense that we're incurring the largest costs. And again, Randy mentioned that we'll be coming back more to talk about those in more detail. We have eliminated any change in capital reserve transfer in this budget, and then we have just the funding of the debt service for what is needed to fund debt service, and the additional, that's it on that one. And then, so you can see this in summary there then with the, and this is assuming, I should have mentioned, this is assuming a 4.1% tax increase, and we do have some fund balance projections showing a lower tax increase. But you can see even with that, we are drawing $290,000 then in order to fund the debt service, even with a 4.1. This is all fund balance then, using a 4.1% tax increase. You can see the balances there in the 2023-24 year related to each of our components of fund balance. And then the next slide is at 2.4. So you can see the reduction is really affecting our debt service, proposed new debt service balance. This is a chart showing the fund balance. This is including unassigned plus committed. We do exclude the health insurance committed there, but it's showing what this looked like at the budget during when we did the budget for 2022-23. That's the lower line. The middle line is assuming a 2.4% tax increase, and the top line is assuming a 4.1. So this is why we're talking about retaining fund balance and the need for that. As we go out, right now, we don't have a balanced budget, and therefore it's eating away at this fund balance. So you can see the various levels there. We focus on the first 5 years. 10 years is going out, we know it's difficult to project out that far, but even within that 5-year period, you can see the deterioration. These next two charts are showing the one version at 4.1 and one at a 2.4% tax increase. The various shading there, the line is the state maximum for unassigned fund balance. The bottom, the blue, is unassigned fund balance, and you can see the various shading. We have PSERS and revenue shortfall in the first 2 years, and then those two going away and a proposed debt service combining to form the debt service commitment. And you can see how that is eaten away as we go through the years because we're having to draw on that in order to balance the budget. And this is at 2.4%, so you can see the difference in how that looks. And then additional topic areas for next steps is to talk more about staffing and any proposed staffing positions, options to resolve the fund balance issue, and then the discussion tonight was, if there is any input related to tax increase from the board or any direction from the board.
So if I could just, before the board ask any questions, but just add that we really do like to focus on the first 5 years in that 10-year project. We know that there are many assumptions even in those first 5 years that make the next 5 years even are difficult to estimate, but we do include those for purposes. We are very aware as an administration of some of the challenges that we are facing, and yet we need to provide the most adequate staffing and programs for our students, and then also the opportunities for our employees. But tonight, aside any questions you may have about the information that we provided, the largest thing that you can provide to us, since the whole thing, is direction on a tax increase. If there is, if there are strong feelings or direction that members would like to see, in addition to anything that we've already presented, as well as something maybe vastly different from what we've already presented. As we understand that you may be from constituents, or hearing from various members of the community, as well as residential community, there are constraints being placed on taxpayers through their employers, as well as inflation that they are feeling. As Mrs. Watson said, a large amount of our budget increase in some of our expenses is related to inflation. And so we just would ask for any direction and comments that you have there on, especially on. Thank you.
Any questions or comments from the board?
I'm not sure when.
You're not sure when?
So I have questions about the capital piece. Is this the time for that? Because you talked about it earlier.
I'm not sure what you mean, but go ahead and ask the question.
Well, I think the answer may be tied into that 29 million shift into the general fund. And I'm trying to understand previously, until this year, the capital reserve fund had shown borrowing for the middle school and had shown things continuing on past this year for the elementary bonds, the 2018-2019 bonds. And that seems to be dropping off. And is that tied into what you were just talking about with that transfer?
When we moved the debt service over into the general fund, those funds are the ones that were moved to the general fund,
Right.
those payments.
So I had noticed that big chunk, and so now I think, and I'd also noticed this missing, and now I realize they do fit together.
Yes.
I still don't understand totally the rationale for it, but that's a different thing. But at least because I've been wondering about that in terms of how we suddenly weren't going to have to borrow for a middle school, and that piece I still don't understand.
Well, we're not saying that we won't have to borrow from middle school. We have not shown any debt service for English at this time, but we are showing in the beginning in 28-29 a transfer to the debt service fund from the general fund that is potentially available that could count for service if a Brookforest Middle School borrowing was necessary. Given that we have, by we're looking at about in the $60 million range in the capital reserve fund at the time, and that is the cost for a middle school several years ago. Obviously, inflation could be jacking that up and increasing that to a much larger number. But until we do a district-wide master plan, hopefully the next year, start that process sooner rather than later, we don't have any better information than that. So hopefully there will not have to be a large amount of borrowing that project, and we'll be able to use a large amount of the capital reserve. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize if I have a poor connection, and I do apologize.
That's what's going on. I'm curious, and I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but I think in terms of the chairpersons for the Finance Committee, would there be any particular questions that'd be helpful? Got any questions that'd be helpful for us in terms of generating discussion about this particular dilemma or question that Randy's asking us to answer?
Well, I mean, I think that what I'm hearing from Randy and Donna is that they would like some direction from the board on what type of a tax increase we are considering.
Right.
For the purposes of illustration, for the last few months, the Finance Department has been bringing us budgets based on a 4.1% tax increase as a worst-case scenario.
Right.
And I think we've expressed during that entire time, certainly I have expressed personally, and I think Randy has expressed, and as a board, I think everyone would prefer to have a smaller tax increase if possible. I guess for me, as one of 9, what would be helpful in order to make the decision would be a little bit of some what-if hypothetical scenarios. So say, for example, for the purposes of illustration, tonight we were shown information with a 4.1% tax increase versus a 2.4% tax increase. And if I read the information properly, I think that's a difference of about $2 million in the first year, right?
Correct.
So if we were to say, try to go forward with a 2.4% tax increase, and we didn't want to just use our rainy day fund, what do we have to cut to find that $2 million, right? Because I think when we look at the out years, those are the decisions that we need to be thinking about. If we feel that our community cannot handle the higher tax increase, and we want to move towards having a balanced budget, then we are going to have to think about shrinking expenses somewhere. And I think it would be helpful for the board and the community to know what are those types of, what are we looking at if we're looking at trying to shrink? Because if you make it more concrete, well, if you don't raise taxes by the 4.1% this year, we might have to cut, I don't want to say anything out loud because I don't want it to get quoted in a bad way, right? But I think those are the opportunity costs, right, that we need to be thinking about. So I think if the administration could come back with a couple of thoughts on that would be, I think, helpful. I would remind, I guess, the board and the community, even though I would love to see us closer to the 2.4% tax increase, we did over the last year we had a small tax increase, but the previous 2 years, we had 0% tax increases. And that's lost revenue, and that's lost revenue like that forever, right? It's cumulative over time. And when those decisions were made in the height of the pandemic, I believe that we kind of let the community know we're doing a 0% tax increase now, but that may necessitate a larger than average tax increase, at least in that first year after, right? So, everyone would like to see a smaller tax increase, but we took 2 years of zero, and we need to remember that. And there was a really illustrative graph that maybe we can bring back, and I can find it and email you guys about it, that I think was discussed at a finance committee meeting, which kind of looked at what the millage rate would have been if we had done 2% tax increases during the pandemic and just kind of kept it as at a moderate tax increase over time. And if we did a 4.1, we're basically just getting ourselves back to where we would have been. Again, I'd love to see us with a lower tax increase as one of 9. But if that's going to necessitate huge cuts and painful things, then we need to know that.
And just for your information, the 2.4% was the 10-year average, so that was where that came from.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the projections have all been based on roughly 2% increases over time. And then we play with next year and leave everything else at 2%, like for the community to understand. So I think Deb's question in terms of like what will we cut is a good point. I don't think though that, I could be wrong, but I don't know that she's asking you to like make decisions about what you would cut. But I think, so the best example I can use is like in development, when you're fundraising for a group, you say, please donate $50 and it will buy the children 10 boxes of crayons, So in order, like a representative idea of what that, what we would have to cut to make the budget balance. Like we'd have to cut 10 teachers, or we would have to cut, this program, or we would have to stop funding all the clubs. So if we have a way for the community to get a sense of what that money represents, I think that's really helpful, because if we have to make a decision between, say, for example, 2 and 4%, and we know that not going to 4% means in the next 5 years we have to cut this much stuff, and that's what that would look like. That's helpful for the community to understand the why, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes.
So I wouldn't be asking you to make decisions about like, oh, we might have to cut these things. I think it's really just trying to get the community to understand what that dollar figure could represent. The kind, we would have to cut this many athletic programs, or we would have to cut, this part of the music program, or things like that, so that they can have a sense of what the value is. Would be just helpful to try and explain it. And to Deb's point, I think people can say a lot of things, but I think it's rare for a school board member to desire to, astronomically raise taxes, because we know that has repercussions for the community. That's never our goal. Our goal is to maintain our programs and do the things that we need to support students. So I really appreciate the information about inflation, because I think that's a double-edged sword that we have to keep explaining to the community, right? That inflation is impacting how much we have to spend, that's our expenditures. It also makes it hard for us to raise taxes on our community, because they are also suffering from those same issues. And so that really puts us in this narrow box in terms of when we're trying to address our spending. So we have to figure out, how do we walk that knife's edge that we're covering ourselves for inflation and not, overly potentially making it difficult for our community to deal with their own ways with inflation. So, thanks.
Donna or Randy, could you also just remind us of the timing? We need to make our decision. We need to pass our budget before the state has to pass its budget. Right? And so Jackie's going to have more information about the proposed state budget next time, but we generally don't build in any increases in proposed state funding into our budget, because it's not guaranteed. But if we were to get an increase in state funding, that could help offset, I think,
that is true.
to a large extent, right?
Yes, and there is some information in here too, as Jackie had highlighted some of the information in the
Yeah.
memo related to what was proposed, but we won't know that until after their budget is passed, which will be after ours. And right now, our budget is scheduled to be voted on the first meeting in June. We still have the ability to amend the budget after the state's budget, but by passing it in the beginning of June, it would allow us to issue the real estate taxes in the beginning of July as scheduled.
Great, thank you.
And just to be very, very clear, we do know that our state funding will not go down. So we just, in case anyone was wondering about that, we just don't know if it will increase or how much it will increase.
I just wanted to, I guess, repeat something that Deb said, which is that I remember having long conversations when we had the 0% increase from during the pandemic. Some of the board members here are going to remember those conversations. And at the time, I think that you have to put yourself back in time and how scary that time was. But at the time, I think the thinking behind those decisions was that that eventually, soon, hopefully, at that time is what we were thinking, that we would have a new norm, and that in the new norm, then we would, as Deb said, have like 4%-ish tax increases to make up for, or to, that would be bigger than 2, right? Which is what we didn't do because we did 0. And what's so tricky about this now, of course, because you can't predict the future, and we did not have the ability to do that back then, is just the reality that people are living in now with inflation. And so it's just a really complicated situation that we're in now, because we wanted to have 0 for those years, and then thinking, oh, we'll have a higher tax increase later, and then none now, and then now is coming, and now is really, really difficult for many, many people. And so I'm not giving much feedback to Donna and Randy by saying any of that, but just that it's tough. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Donna, what is the percentage of our budget that is salary?
It is approximately 80-some percent.
Salary and benefits.
Benefits.
Salary and benefits,
So when your budget is 80% of your budget, or salaries are 80% of your budget, and you're talking about reducing $2 million, you are talking staffing.
But this is also showing increased staffing because of keeping the ones that we had added.
Through ESSER
Right,
funding.
yeah.
Yes. So not only have your ESSER funding is no longer, but you're also 0% increases. You're now hitting a serious plateau or deficit in funding.
I think when we went through the budget cuts in 2011, and we went to a school finance course actually by Bill Hartman, and that what Mr. Johnson says is exactly right. You want to make the cuts as far away from the student as possible, but there's less and less as you get further away from the student, because the things that is closest to the student are all the faculty, and employee and administrative salaries and benefits that go to support those students' learning outcomes. So that's the dilemma, is that the further you go out, the less you have to cut, in terms of, or trim. That's a problem.
You're looking for a benchmark. You're looking for, in other words, if 2.4 is simply an average.
Correct.
It's not based on any
10-year average.
facts, if you will, other than it's a statistic. And the other alternative is the upper threshold in terms of what's possible under Act 1.
Correct.
We can go to 4.1.
Anywhere in
Well,
between.
in terms of finding a new middle, halfway between the two, between 2.4 and 4.1, which might, what would that be? 3.1, 3.2?
I'm not good at board math on the blackboard or at the board table.
That's okay.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, I mean, in terms of looking at it in terms of another reference point, that wasn't so, well, in a way, this is arbitrary as well, but it might be closer to the reality that we're dealing with, is that we're all under inflationary pressures. That's the reality. And we're all also trying to recover from two really serious setbacks in terms of previous revenues, 2 years of no increases. And so we're trying to recover from that. How do we do that without pretending these problems aren't there? We have to give some reference to this circumstance in which we find ourselves. And I'm thinking maybe split the difference and come to an average between the two as a possible aiming point for the budget.
I don't know, for me, I'd really want to see the projections. I don't think, I'm not comfortable making a decision just to, I would need to see the impacts of those things because, you know, we know the positions that we added for mental health are really extraordinarily critical. Personally, you know, that's not something that I would want to see us have to forgo or our students have to forgo. We've seen the benefit of it, and it's a necessary part of where all school districts are going right now in terms of providing those kind of services and supports for students. So, you know, I would want to, and I know you and Randy have very frequently given us a couple different options as we move through this process of like what 0 might look like and what 2 or 4 would look like. So as usual, when we get that information, I think that's probably the most helpful to make a decision.
And we'll continue to work on other items in the budget as well to continue to review.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just want to say that I think that the projections are really important. I think, like Debbie, I want to be able to think through scenarios. And I really want to, you know, just sort of second, I think, what the spirit was behind what Mr. Johnson and Mr. Leo said about, you know, that the closer, you know, the further away from the student we are, the sort of harder it is, or like what Jim said. I'll just say what Jim said, and that I really think that it's important that we keep in mind that all of those numbers represent the livelihoods of people who are employed by the school district. And that the people who are employed by the school district are an integral part of what makes this a great place to live, a great place to raise a family, and for them to raise their families. And that I think that it is in the interest of at least this board member to make sure that the people who work, that we work for the people who work for us, and that might mean that we, you know, I'm not committing myself to any number, but I'm certainly not, I'm personally not afraid of a 4.1% tax increase.
I think that was really well said, and I would say like my appetite, like 2.4 is kind of like I think the bottom of what I would consider at this point. Like anything below that, I mean, I lose sleep over this a night anyway, but I might lose more at that point, and I still have an appetite. Like I would still want to see the data up to 4.1 personally. Like I would still want to see that information as we look at various options going forward.
Jackie.
Go for it.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think realistically that we do each year, there are people who retire or move away. And so the sooner we begin thinking in hard terms about this, the more likely we can do what we need to do so that we're not, in fact, dealing with people who are actually working for the school district, because we're planning ahead and knowing that we do need to make a reduction and that that's part of how we can do it. And so I think that to continue not to at least look at the picture is not helping at all. We've got to start planning longer term, not just for this year, but really looking out. Because again, we're saying we have been for some time projecting 2% every year, no matter what. And we, at least as far as I know, still have a relatively declining student population. So
I want to reiterate that point as well. With the teacher shortage, school districts are hiring sooner and sooner to get the best candidates. So the longer we withhold making the decision, the harder it is for us to fulfill the positions that we would need to.
Yeah.
So.
And I'm sorry, I don't recall the demographic data that was presented to us indicating a massive decline in students.
Not
we have
massive.
You just said declining student population.
Yeah, but not massive. I think it's been slowly.
Well, the implication of what you said was that we were declining, so we shouldn't project higher, or at least that's what I was hearing. So I found that confusing then. In regards to, I think that historically the 2% has been pretty stable, and the decision to use that as a projection parameter was based on historically what has borne out. And certainly I don't dispute that number may need to change. However, I think we don't have the requisite data to make a decision on what that number should be based on the fact that we've had economic insecurity for the last 3 to 4 years with the pandemic. So I don't know that how we make an adjustment in that safely. I think that would again be spitballing, which isn't in our best interest. So at this point, I understand why you and Randy continue to choose to use 2% because it's what we've used historically. It's been well-founded for our community in the past. I was going to say something else, but I can't.
Any other comments?
Just one.
Yes.
We will be talking in our action items about building. And that's the other piece that I'm looking at in this capital thing, is that we were talking about, we've got these capital needs and we've come up with money, and that's still not clear to me. So I'll mention it now. We'll talk more about it when we talk about, we're not committing to doing anything now except going to bid. We don't know what things will be until we get the bids back. But
You're talking about the funding for the physical
yeah,
building, which is recommended from capital reserve.
right.
I want to thank Deb for accepting and very graciously and very effectively offering some ideas to get the conversation started.
Yep.
Because I put you on the spot, and I appreciate you were putting ideas out there that could be a reference point for us in terms of our conversation. Thank you.
Sure.
If board members, if I could just say that I appreciate what you shared tonight, and we'll do our best to respond to you as quickly as possible.
Thanks so much, Randy. Thank you so much, Ms. Watson.
Thank you, Donna.
All right, that brings us to the end of our information reports. At this time, we'll have public comment. Each individual will be allotted up to 3 minutes for items discussed to this point on the agenda. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item as required by the Sunshine Act. If additional time is necessary, the board may consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during the next meeting. As a reminder, public comment is a chance for community members to share their thoughts with the board. It is not a time for the board to answer questions or engage in conversations. You can always email the board at all-board@scasd.org. Is there anyone in person who would like to make a public comment? Is there anyone joining us remotely who would like to make a public comment? You want to make a public comment?
No, just a comment. I believe that we had one or two people leave, and I think we really need to talk about keeping public comment this late in the program. We stay here no matter what, but for community members to come hoping that they can talk and say something, and to not have them just waiting all this time, I think we need to look at that again. I'm not comfortable with it.
All right, thank you for your comment. Do you guys want to take a 5-minute break? All right, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and start agenda. Oh,
Are they there?
Hannah Carney. Does anyone know Hannah Carney?
Nope.
Yes.
Yeah, do you have her number? Can you I'd like to call the board back to session. All right. So I want to apologize. Right before we took a break, I noticed, just as we were breaking, that there was an attendee who was joining us virtually who did have a public comment, had a hand up. So I just wanted to ask again, are there is there anyone joining us virtually who would like to make a comment? And if you would, please go ahead and raise your hand and we can honor that request. All right, I see Hannah Carney.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I'm sorry I was slow to raise my hand before, but I appreciate your calling on me. I just wanted to thank Tanya Black for her presentation on the equity plan update. I am a co-chair of the Race and Marginalized Populations Work Group in the district, and we have been pushing for a data dashboard in particular for some time now, so I'm very encouraged to hear that that is in process. And just to add to that a little bit, I think some of the information that it will be very helpful to have on that dashboard is related to the discipline disproportionality that we have had pointed out in our district in at least 2 audits. So I'm very interested to see that data presented publicly every semester, as it said in the updated plan. And I would also encourage the board to push for a timeline on the data dashboard, as well as some of the other items that were in the equity plan update. It was very helpful in the report to see a timeline on the handbook and the culturally responsive training. So would just love to know a timeline for that data dashboard. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your comment. Is there anyone else joining us virtually who would like to make a public comment or here? All right, we'll move on. Thank you so much. Moving on to routine approvals, is there a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion? Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, and it doesn't even need to be answered tonight necessarily, but the one piece of the budget finance presentation that we didn't even really touch on this evening was a report about funding of athletics and activities. And the item on out-of-state overnight travel kind of relates to that, so I just wanted to point something out. We pay for our athletes to go to their state competition, and I think that's awesome. But we are not paying for our math counts students to go to their state competition. And it looks to be about the same per student cost as the swimming championships, for example, and significantly less than the wrestling championships. I think Miriam talked about the DECA students that went to their state competition, and I don't think we pay for DECA, but I do think we paid for the music students to go to the PEMA. So I just think it's something we want to keep in our minds and maybe think about as we're looking at the budget going forward. What is the consistent framework we're using for making the decision about what we're paying for our students to attend their state competitions? Anyway, so I have that question. If we know why we're not paying for math counts, I'd love to hear it. I think we've paid for it in the past, but it's fine if we don't. I just want to think about it for the future. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Any other comments or questions on the routine approvals?
I can just say ditto, Deb, and this issue has come up for the 7 years that I've been on the board.
Is there any public comment on any of the routine items, either here or online? All right, we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
All right, moving on to action items. Next on the agenda are the action items. Agenda item 7A is a motion to approve the appointment of Curtis Johnson as the new superintendent for the State College Area School District. Just to be clear, this vote is to approve the contract for Mr. Curtis Johnson. The board will be continuing to work on the job description and goals in conjunction with Mr. Johnson. I would,
So moved.
Seconded.
Third.
14th, all right. Before I ask for discussion, I'd like to make a brief statement. So tonight, the board will consider a motion to appoint Curtis Johnson as the new superintendent for the State College Area School District. Over the past 10 months, the board has worked in conjunction with a consultant, Tom Templeton, to conduct a nationwide search for a superintendent. This included gathering input from many stakeholders in the community so that we could hear what attributes our community desired in a superintendent. Thank you to everyone who participated in this process. Your engagement was inspiring, and the input assisted us as we met with candidates. I'm proud to live in a place where everyone is so invested in their schools. After a thorough search, the board concluded that the best candidate for superintendent of schools is Mr. Johnson. As an employee of the district for over 20 years, Mr. Johnson has an in-depth working knowledge of the district and has already developed positive working relationships that will allow him to get to the task of superintendent quickly. In addition, Mr. Johnson's vision to make SCASD the best district it can possibly be inspires the board as well as many who work with him. While we all recognize that SCASD is a great district with many strengths, Mr. Johnson sees that it can be even more exceptional and is ready to do the work to move the district in that direction. Finally, Mr. Johnson has the ability to see each student as their own person who has their own unique path through school and beyond. This is the best part. His appreciation and support of the individuals who make up the district means that Mr. Johnson will support the flourishing of all students in SCASD. Mr. Johnson, we are really proud to bring this motion tonight. Is there anyone else at the board who'd like to comment? Is there any public comment? Come to the podium. Thank you. I could use a minute.
Okay, I'll introduce myself, Amber Concepcion. I live in Patton Township and former board member. I came here to say tonight how delighted I am to see Curtis Johnson as the next superintendent of schools for State College Area School District. I met Mr. Johnson when we were planning the high school building project, so probably back in 2011, and have gotten to know him over the more than a decade since then. Mr. Johnson is a very student-centered teacher, administrator, and now superintendent. He's focused on increasing opportunities for all students, not only establishing new AP courses and International Baccalaureate program courses, but he's worked tirelessly to ensure that supportive programs exist to ensure that all kids would have access to rigorous courses and could succeed, and that the supports were in place for all students to succeed. High expectations for all and high support for all. When Dr. O'Donnell left our district for a superintendency in another district, Mr. Johnson did not just keep the lights on here in our district. He has worked intently to build and implement this district strategic plan with a vision for lifting all students and being able to demonstrate progress. Mr. Johnson is focused on building a district that is a great place for all kids to learn, and also investing in developing teachers and leaders among the staff here in our district. And he has a great appreciation for the role of families in our community and the need for engaging parents and listening to the voices of families about their experiences and needs. So I really just want to thank Mr. Johnson for his commitment to our community and his willingness to serve. And I'm so optimistic about the future of our district with his leadership. So, thanks.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment? Come on up to the podium, please.
Wow. All this written down. Pardon me. Hi, Aaron Miller. I live in Ferguson Township. Yay! That's it.
Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment, either here or in person or online? All right. I'll have go ahead.
I will
please.
make one really quick comment. So Amber's comments just reminded me that I too, before I began my journey in a State College Area School District, started with you. One of the very first engagements I had was going on a high school tour about the aging infrastructure of the building, and you were the leader of my tour group. And I was so struck by how much you knew and got to know you through that. And I think this is just a really sweet moment for me personally to bring my experience here full circle. And as Amber said, I am really excited about the possibilities. I think that we've had a lot of struggle through the pandemic, but we've also laid a lot of foundation. And I've seen in the 10 months that you've served as interim, this continued momentum that we've gained and this potential that we now have to really slingshot ourselves beyond the struggles that we had in the pandemic. And that just makes me really grateful and excited. So, like somebody said, yay!
All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Jackie? Oh,
Yeah, so there was a moment that, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, Curtis. There was a moment that you shared with us that I think really meant a lot to me, and I think really indicated the something to me as an individual about how you think about the dignity of all people. And that's that you shared that you had visited a former student when they were incarcerated. Mm-hmm. And I think that says a lot. I think that says a lot.
Mm-hmm. You want me to speak to that?
You don't have to. I just think I think that that's something that maybe people are unlikely to know, but that's a deep kindness in my view. And I want to thank you for doing that.
And emblematic of how we
Yeah.
I wanted to say, as someone who had a son who graduated the year that there was no graduation, and you stood, people may not know who didn't have a child doing that, but you stood in the lobby, in the main area of the high school. You didn't really need a mask because you're that much taller. But people, we made an appointment and we could come in and you took a picture with each, I think probably most of the kids, and talked with them. You knew them, at least you knew, the ones that I saw you with. And I thought that really meant a lot, both to the kids who may not always express it, but certainly to me as a parent. It meant a lot because they lost a lot and they lost that chance to do this. And so giving them that was really very special, and I appreciated it. And I think it also shows the way you think about both the academic but also the rest of the child too.
Thank you.
Let's have a roll call vote then.
Gladly. Ms. Huff. Or,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Dr. Duffy. I'm so excited.
A week later.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes again.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zinni.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
And if I may,
Awesome!
Oh,
Lynn, you're the best.
I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone. I wouldn't be in this position without the support, especially of the board, who had faith enough to appoint me and make me the interim superintendent through these 10 months, for the administrative staff who has helped me through this process. This whole process just reminds me of the little things that I have taken for granted and forgotten about, and people just like Laurel brought up remind me of just the things that I have done over the years. It's been a great 20 years, and I would like to continue working in that capacity, moving the district forward to the best of my ability. So thank you for having your trust in me and appointing me this position. So thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Not yet. All right.
Second.
Action item B is a motion to approve the 2023-2024 Central Intermediate Unit Number 10 General Operating Budget. This is shown in attachment 7B. Thank you, Dr. Buck. Go ahead.
So moved.
Second.
Yep.
Are there any questions or discussion?
I just want to remind everyone that this is an annual process. This represents a subset of the IU's finances. They have a number of budgets that are pass-through monies that come from Harrisburg or come from the Department of Education in Harrisburg or come from the federal government. And the intermediate unit manages those funds and uses it for dedicated programs, various grants programs. This is about maybe 5% of those total amounts. But through that work, through that budgeting process, there are funds that we acquire, or basically revenue that comes from that work, that needs to be accounted for. So this budget represents the operations that account for those monies. And we fund the executive director's office, with the IU funds curriculum and school improvement activities, the business office, an internal service fund, technology, and building and maintenance activities. All those things are funded through this smaller budget, which is in the amount of $2,247,000. This does not involve any contributions from any member school districts. I think IU-10 is one of 2 or 3 intermediate units in Pennsylvania that accept no monies from their member districts. Let's see. It does represent income from fee-for-service programs, indirect costs, administrative fees, and then some various fund transfers that have revenue funded as a result of that. And I would simply recommend this approval for this particular budget. This approval is passed on to the IU office along with the decisions by other member school districts. And it leads, and there's, like everything else we do budget-wise, there's a deadline for this, but I recommend that we approve that, and that at your place this evening, you'll find a ballot form that you need to sign and pass on to Lynn to represent your decision this evening. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Board members, if you would please sign the ballot at your seat and return to Lynn after the meeting. Thank you so much. All right, agenda item 7C is a motion to approve the 2023-2024 assessment plan. This is shown in attachment 7C.
That's great.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion on this item? Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to thank Chris and Danielle for working on this. And we did talk about it some. Often we've had more of a discussion, but it's very much similar to what we've had in the past, but with a little more explanation so that people can see that it's not just sort of nonstop testing all the time, because it can look like that. It can look like a constant thing. And some of the things on there are not even, like the very last one is NOCTI. And that's something you only take if you're in a certain position. It's not something that every child takes. And there's several things in there that may be dependent on one situation. But we do have a board policy that says we approve this. And so we approve it.
I like the fact that it was really well laid out and you could follow it, and I think you did a really good job. So thank you for taking our suggestion and preparing it like that. It was really great.
All right, is there any public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zinni.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes. All right, agenda item 7D is a motion to approve a Penn State research proposal for a robotics study. This is shown in attachment 7D.
So moved.
Are there any questions or discussions on this item?
I'm just curious which schools we expect to be participating in the study and when we expect this to take place.
Sure.
Because the information attached still says everything's going to be in Colorado.
Shouldn't be. It shouldn't. The new information should say it'd be updated for State College.
It was updated. Oh, was it updated today? I'm sorry.
So, sorry.
That's okay.
So do you know which schools? Just
Most likely the high school. I think Dr. Kobina is on the phone. He may be able to answer that.
Oh, he is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, once it is, thank you for reviewing, by the way. Once it's accepted, I spoke with Heather, and it's up to Heather and the teachers wherever she puts me. So we don't have anything specifically identified at this point.
All right.
And I can chime in too. I'm sorry. Our initial thoughts are the high school with some of the programming in that building. We have identified potential students that this would be a good fit for.
All right, did that answer your question?
Sure. Okay. Partly, of course, would be it's a voluntary study. So if no one volunteers at the high school, he may have to look elsewhere.
Right. Gotcha. All right. Any other questions or comments? Any public comment on this item? All right, we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Zinni.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
All right, agenda item 7E is a motion to approve another Penn State research proposal for an MDS classroom. This is shown in attachment 7E.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion? Yes.
I just want to say that both of these are absolutely fascinating. One of these days, we will actually make a day to hear back from all the people who are doing these studies, and we are so fortunate that our kids get to participate and that we all get to grow from them. And I thank the people who submitted them.
Yeah. This is really substantive.
Yeah.
And it really adds value to the field. And it's really, and not just obviously by involving our staff, our staff and our students, do they get something out of this? But it's in terms of how it can be potentially replicated throughout the field nationally or internationally. It's just very, very valuable and hard to underestimate in terms of the benefits it serves to others.
All right, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zinni.
Yes.
Thank you. Agenda item 7F is a motion to approve a master service agreement with Playworks for paraprofessional development. This is shown in attachment 7F.
So moved.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion?
Megan. Y'all know that I often go and look into programs, and this one, as I was reading through it, it looked interesting and it sounded a little familiar, and I checked with my daughter who has had Playworks at her school that she teaches at and spoke very highly of them and the sort of feel that the people brought. And this, I think, is an expansion into the consulting piece, but she was very positive on the program when I read through it. it looked very interesting. And if I'm understanding this, it looked like it's almost, so here's the question part. This is a pilot, sort of, is that correct?
It is. Easterly is our most challenging school this year, and a lot of incidents at recess. We had done some research before, so Playwork sometimes brings staff in. This is, like you said, consulting. They will provide professional development. We will have some administrators of other schools part of that professional development to see that. It can be up to 35 people. And then they will come the next day and model and review with the recess paras, with staff who then can continue that, and with the administration there. We would like to see how it goes this year at one of our most challenging buildings to consider it for the future, pending what happens with the future of recess paras and the way we are currently doing things. If it could be a model, we'd like to expand it if we find that it can really make an impact.
Well, thank you for looking for this, because we've talked about, the need to help. We want the kids to have recess. We have a policy for that, but we want them to get a lot out of it. So thanks for looking for this. Looks great.
Is it reasonable to consider this a form of positive behavior support?
Yeah.
In terms of providing oversight, supervision, guidance to the students?
Yes.
And reducing the likelihood they're going to get involved in difficult behaviors?
Correct. And modeling and helping them understand how to set expectations and boundaries, but also really encourage play in a positive manner.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, is there any public comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zinni. Yes. Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Agenda item 7G is a motion to approve turf replacement for Memorial Field. This is shown in attachment 7G.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion on this topic, or on this item? Sorry. Yes.
I just had a quick comment for Mike a little bit. Just some context, frame of reference. And so, Mike, this is just the turf surface, right? Not the infill?
That is correct.
Okay. Because we did at one point several years ago, we had some discussions and had asked Mr. Poprick, your predecessor, to do a little research about the variety of options for fill due to sustainability reasons, health risks, things like that. So you may or may not have seen that, and that's not relevant necessarily to the decision tonight. I just kind of wanted to bring it up in all our memories as something that we kind of cared about and talked about at one point, but we know is kind of a big endeavor in terms of addressing that potential issue and a change there. So anyway, I just
Amy,
wanted to.
I'm gonna backtrack. I was thinking that you meant the actual underlayment or the structure underneath, but yes, this would be the infill as well. So it's
Like that's the rubber part, right? That's what I'm getting at, the ground rubber, whatever material.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And we've looked, and Chris is there, and we've looked at multiple studies. I mean, there's studies all over the place that say that that the artificial turf with the proper infill is safer than natural turf, and other studies that contradict that is kind of what we're finding.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not arguing about natural versus synthetic turf. I think
it was the material.
It was about the material, about what kind of rubber it is, and the carcinogenic risk and other things. And again, just to the same point that you're making, there's really nothing definitive at that point in time. A couple years ago, when we visited this topic, there was a lot of a rash of anecdotal cases and other things, which is not a reason to make a massive change. We have a slate of a lot of new board members, and I just wanted to let people know that that was a discussion we did have in the past. It was something, we talked about, and it certainly may become relevant again at some point in the future as that landscape potentially does change. And so since you weren't here when we did that, I just wanted to mention we had gone through that, and I think Chris had been part of that whole investigation and discussion too. So just in case it comes to mind for somebody, I wanted to bring up that it's something we've talked about and maybe something we revisit sometime in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say a very similar discussion happened in the Center Region Council of Governments around the turf that would be used at the Whitehall Road Regional Park, and that there were people who were concerned about groundwater contamination and whatnot. And at that time, the EPA was preparing to do studies about what the potential for groundwater contamination, et cetera, microplastic infiltration, things of that nature. This site is different from that site also. I mean, I know that we're located over a sinkhole, which has been remediated, right? Very important to say, which has been remediated. And the last time I looked at this, there wasn't something that I was concerned about, and that's something that I am typically very concerned about, just if that matters to anybody.
Just quickly clarifying, in case anyone is wondering, because we often do have bids on this, that, and I wanted to double check with Mike, this is through one of our various networks that allows us to do no bid because they've already done the work ahead of time. Is that correct?
This is a CoStar's proposal, although we did go through the exercise of getting multiple pricing from competitors that have somewhat similar turfs, but the pricing was all very, very comparable. And we felt working with athletics that this was, this specific turf would best suit our student athletes.
Thank you.
Do we have studies on the sort of lifetime of this particular turf?
This turf in particular has an 8-year warranty to it. So if something happens, they come in and take care of it for the next 8 years.
And generally what wears it down is the solar?
So,
wear and tear.
solar and just, wear and tear.
Yeah.
Memorial Field, we probably get a little bit longer life out of. I think this is 11 years now. We'd probably see that as a longer life field, simply because it doesn't get the same wear and tear as, let's say, North Turf or the South Track. I mean, especially North Turf, where we have people on it, constantly. Whereas Memorial Field, it's used a little bit less.
But actually, because I look back at these things, we approved it in April of 2013, so kudos to our maintenance people and our athletes who have kept it in good shape, because it had an 8-year warranty then. So, good.
I should note also that coming for the board in April would be a piece of maintenance equipment specifically for this turf to help us keep it, keep the infill leveled for us, keep it vacuumed, and keep it cleaned as well, because it does get, it's kind of in the center of the town, and we want to keep it as clean as possible for our student athletes, which will also be able to be used at both South Track Field and the North Turf.
For us hockey guys, it's like a turf Zamboni.
That's correct. Yes.
Is there any? Make the minutes.
ZAM.
Yeah. Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Dr. Krevakor?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Zinni?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Agenda item 7H is a motion to approve the purchase of a mail truck for the physical plant department. This is shown in attachment 7H.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion?
I just would like to drive it one day. I really would like to drive the mail truck.
I want to
But
drive the
other
turf
than
thing.
that,
Yeah, I want the Zamboni
Only that
too.
stick shift. Is it a stick or automatic? That's my question.
Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Buck?
Yes.
Dr. Krevakor?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Ms. Huff?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Zinni?
Yes.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Agenda item 7I is a motion to approve permission to bid physical plant building. This is shown in attachment 7I.
So moved.
Second.
Are there any questions or discussion?
We're just going out to bid on it. We will talk more about it when it comes back. I wish we had more information about what other alternatives were looked at because we know we need to clear out Fairmont. But, and this, I believe that this is probably the best choice, but without knowing that and without seeing that, it's hard to represent that to someone who says, so why are you building a new building, and why are you building it there? So, makes sense to go out to bid, see what comes back, but I still have a concern about the building itself.
Ms. Zidney, if I could ask that you go to the district website under facilities. We've created a section of historical records. If there's something that is still missing from the previous presentations, I'd like to understand more. I think that we've documented that we do not own any other land at this time, with the exception of the field of trees next to Panorama that could potentially house this building. And so that would be the only other thing. And the spot of land that we've chosen is, as we've said before, central to a large part of our campus there at the high school, as well as the rest of our district, and is not functional for a lot of things that the spot of Panorama, once excavated, could serve at different field bases and things like that. So I'm not sure if we have discussed many options. Maybe we haven't, without buying the land, I guess is the other point that I'd like to make.
All right, thanks, Randy. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Is there any public comment on this item? We'll have a roll call vote.
Dr. Crevecore.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Ms. Huff.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Anderson.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Brandt.
Yes.
Dr. Buck.
Yes.
Okay, looking ahead to future meetings, we have another board meeting next week on Monday, March 20th, so only a week from today. That will include action items on 2301 EPE generator addition, 2307 GWE fire suppression system replacement, 2308 GWE hot water pump replacement, 2317 CSE ADA ramp, the North Building project permission to bid, food service equipment steamers, school bus bids, policies 320, 321, 709, 805.1, and 805.2, as well as information discussion on policies 105.1, 105.2, 711, 824. Finally, on March 24th.
Jackie? Yeah. Are you going to ask for future agenda items? Because I have one.
Okay, go for it.
For future agenda items for March 20th info discussion, an update on Delta becoming a school.
Is that a suggested agenda item?
That's a suggested agenda item.
All right. Okay. So final thing, on March 24th, we will have a policy development committee here at 1:30.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
That sounds right. Okay, thank you.
And just a reminder to the Policy Development Committee members, you should have received a packet of items that we'll be reviewing that we would request that you review well in advance and send minor edits and adjustments by email ahead of time so we can focus the main parts of the discussion of the meeting on the most meaty topics. Sorry, that's the only word I can think of. So you should have received all those. If you have not, please contact me.
Thank you, Amy. I think that's a good direction for the committee.
But since you
also did receive an email about some last minute tweaks to 105.1 and 105.2. No, just for the policy committee, just to last minute rubber stamp some very minor adjustments to those before they come to the full board on the 20th. So if you have any objections, speak soon or forever hold your peace.
Well, it might make sense since all of us have to vote on them if we could get them. when
They're
you've got
coming
them
as
ready.
info discussion on the 20th, so you will get it for then. But in terms of the discussions in the policy committee, there were some tweaks and changes, and there were a couple things that were missed in the last review. So there were a couple small adjustments, so it went back out to the committee just out of respect to make sure that the committee members were okay with those little additions. And then it will come to the full board on the 20th.
For discussion.
Yeah, for info discussion, so there will be plenty of opportunity at that point in time to have the full board participate.
I must have misheard you because I thought you said you had already sent things out for the policy committee meeting.
We did send things out for the policy committee meeting to the policy committee members, correct?
All right. I would now like to call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, thank you so much.